Hello and welcome. If you're watching this on-demand session, it's probably because you heard today's exciting news about the next generation of Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI is the easiest way for existing customers and fans of Hyper-V and Windows Server to take their first step into hybrid cloud by modernizing how they run virtual machines on premises using hyper-converged infrastructure. My name is Cosmos. I work in the Azure team at Microsoft. And for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to unpack today's announcements. We'll dive into the details, do a few demos, and see what's new for Azure Stack HCI. Before we dive in, there are two pieces of background that I'd like to provide really quickly. The first is that Azure Stack HCI is just the latest member in the growing portfolio of Azure Stack products. At Microsoft, we're committed to offering a comprehensive and flexible lineup of edge infrastructure, cloud technology that you run on your premises. This ranges from Azure Stack Hub, a self-contained, API-consistent cloud appliance that's a little bit like having your own Azure region in your data center, all the way down to Azure Stack Edge, a 1U compute server for AI workloads on Microsoft's own first-party hardware. You can learn more about the whole Azure Stack family by going to azure.com/AzureStack. The second thing is that this new Azure Stack HCI product takes its name from a program that Microsoft has run for several years using recent versions of Windows Server. That program was really popular, and it's what inspired this new product. I say this so that you're not confused if you come across documentation or other artifacts from years past that refer to that program using the same name. Sorry for the confusion. If you're not familiar with that program, don't worry about it. If you're an existing customer or fan of that, then I think you'll be particularly excited by what we have to share today. Okay, without further ado, let's jump in. We can start from a simple question. What is Azure Stack HCI? Simply put, Azure Stack HCI is hyper-converged infrastructure. In other words, it's software from Azure that includes our latest hypervisor with built-in software-defined storage and networking. And it's software that you install on your servers that you control on your premises. This software is delivered as an Azure hybrid service, meaning it's monitored, supported, licensed, and billed through Microsoft Azure. If you already have an existing Azure subscription, it's very easy to get started. There's no traditional upfront software license that you need to buy. And critically important, Azure Stack HCI is designed with the needs of IT front and center. You can run Azure Stack HCI on your choice of hardware from your preferred vendor, and you can continue to use the tools, processes, and skills that you and your team already have. Okay, let's dive into each of these areas then. We can start by talking about the core hyper-converged infrastructure stack. Hyper-converged infrastructure in recent years has really become the normal way to deploy new servers, whether it's in the core data center or in a branch or remote office. With HCI, you consolidate a traditional three-tier architecture where you have separate storage arrays and hypervisor hosts and network appliances. You consolidate that onto just industry-standard servers that have extra local drives and extra high-speed networking. The software-defined storage built into HCI converts those extra local drives into virtual data volumes that have fault tolerance and all the other features that you would hope for. And software-defined networking creates virtual switches, networks, load balancers, and gateways. Really, in many ways, hyper-converged infrastructure is the next natural frontier and wave of virtualization. Some typical benefits of Azure Stack HCI include maximizing performance. For example, we have demonstrated over 1 million IOPS per server, which Storage Review called the fastest they've seen, as well as reducing costs by as much as a factor of many times. For example, our customer, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, said that if they had chosen SAN storage, it would have cost 4 times more than Azure Stack HCI. But beyond these typical advantages, today's new Azure Stack HCI brings new advancements to our core HCI stack, enabling scenarios and capabilities that were never possible before. For one, today, Microsoft is releasing a specialized new operating system that's purpose-built for Azure Stack HCI. When you install this product, you'll see it looks and feels distinctly Azure. It's our latest hypervisor with built-in storage and networking. It has a reduced composition that's optimized for virtualization and a minimal local user interface because it's designed from the ground up for remote management. It also includes several exciting new features. For one, it's now possible to stretch an Azure Stack HCI cluster so that it spans multiple locations. This can be multiple rooms, multiple buildings, or even multiple cities that are quite far apart. The built-in synchronous or asynchronous storage replication ensures that all your data is replicated from one site to the other site, so that virtual machines can automatically fail over from one site to the other. This provides business continuity that's very simple to set up. In fact, let me show you with a quick demo. When you provision an Azure Stack HCI cluster through the admin center, you can indicate that the cluster you're going to create uses today's new Azure Stack HCI version 20H2. When you do that, you'll be given the option to specify whether the servers are all in one site or spread across two sites. If you choose spread across two sites, later in the workflow, you'll be given the opportunity to define what those sites are and indicate which of the servers in the cluster are in which of the sites. Then, from that point onward, day to day, when you provision new storage or create new virtual machines, you can indicate on a volume-by-volume basis whether that volume should be simply on one of the sites or replicated from one site to the other. If you choose replicated, then you can select the replication direction from Paris to London or from London to Paris, as well as the replication mode, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, and a number of other configuration choices. This has been one of the most requested additions to Storage Spaces Direct, so we're thrilled to be shipping it. Something else that I think customers are really going to love is that the new Azure Stack HCI introduces a completely re-engineered mechanism for storage spaces to repair and resync data. By tracking overwritten or dirty regions at a very fine granularity, 1,000 times finer than in Windows Server, the average duration of a server resynchronization is reduced in the 50th percentile case, the typical case, by a factor of almost 4. And in the worst case, on the 99th percentile, by a factor of almost 5. This is a game changer that makes applying updates and restarting servers much, much quicker. And last, but certainly not least, soon, customers from select vendors like our good friends at Dell EMC will be able to get driver and firmware updates delivered seamlessly as part of the standard workflow to update an Azure Stack HCI. This delivers integrated full-stack updates with just a single click. You can see here a screenshot of the working prototype snap-in extension that's been co-engineered by Dell EMC and Microsoft. We're really excited. We can't wait to get this into your hands. So that's just a few of the things that are new in the core HCI stack in Azure Stack HCI. Let's switch now to talk about what it means to deliver Azure Stack HCI as an Azure hybrid service. Now, we know from firsthand experience and from customers that hybrid is hard. It's too hard. Whether it's networking or identity or something else, establishing and maintaining a connection between servers that are on premises and the public cloud is challenging. Now, on the one hand, the advantages of cloud-based monitoring and cloud-based security and having the cloud as a single control plane, the advantages are clear. On the other hand, there are good and durable reasons that certain servers and certain workloads can't move to the public cloud, whether that's latency or data sovereignty or some other reason. Azure Stack HCI is all about making it easier to blend those advantages and get the best of both. When you finish setting up an Azure Stack HCI, it natively integrates with Azure and the Azure Resource Manager. There's no separate agent that you need to install and maintain. There's no complicated scripts that you need to fuss with. It's very easy. Azure Arc is built natively into the Azure Stack HCI operating system. So each on-premises cluster is projected into the Azure portal, into the context of your Azure Active Directory as a resource in a resource group in your subscription. This means you can see it in the Azure portal. Let me show you. In my browser, I'm going to navigate to portal.azure.com. And this is just the regular Azure portal on the public internet. So if you've used Azure before, this should look very familiar to you. There's really nothing different. What's new, what you haven't seen before, is this Azure Stack HCI cloud service. This is projecting through a new Azure Stack HCI resource provider all of my on-premises clusters directly into Azure. For example, I can select this first one, Contoso HCI, and here I get a view that shows me information about that Azure Stack HCI cluster. For example, I can see that it has 2 server nodes. They're both Lenovo SE350, and I can see other information like that it's connected to Azure. And over time, this experience will become even richer and will present more information and more management options. This custom resource benefits from many of the standard benefits of an Azure resource. So for example, I can tag it with tags, I can organize my clusters into resource groups, and I can get a single global view of all of my clusters right here in Azure. Azure customers love Azure support, so I'm really pleased to say that the new Azure Stack HCI is covered by Azure support. In fact, Microsoft is creating a new dedicated team staffed by seasoned veterans and subject matter experts specifically to support Azure Stack HCI. As a customer, you can submit a support request and access self-help resources directly in the Azure portal. It's never been easier. And you can choose a plan that suits your needs, starting as low as just $29 a month for developers or $100 a month for standard support. This is really good news for smaller customers for whom a Premier contract just wasn't a realistic option. Of course, if you have Premier, you're covered too. You can visit azure.com/support for more information. Now, despite running on your premises, Azure Stack HCI is billed to your Azure subscription, just like any other Azure service that you use. For the over 95% of Fortune 500 companies and thousands more who use Azure already, this means it's really frictionless to get started. There's no traditional software license. There's no hefty upfront cost for the software. It's a simple cost structure that depends only on the number of physical processor cores that you have. And to be clear, unlike most other HCI vendors, you don't transact one version and then in the future you've got to go buy the next version. Rather, it's an always up-to-date service that keeps getting better through regular feature updates over time. Guest operating systems and guest applications, of course, are licensed separately, and you can learn more at azure.com/pricing. By the way, one thing I love is how the pricing scales down to the edge. There's no minimum or maximum cores. This is really good news for small deployments, and honestly, it opens up a whole new set of opportunities that just haven't been possible before. The addition of management and billing and support through Azure complements existing hybrid capabilities that work even on Windows Server, such as hybrid networking, recovery and replication to the cloud, and using Azure policies to control hosts and VMs. These additions that we're announcing today are also just the beginning. The Azure engineering team is hard at work building even more features that will be coming soon, including my personal favorite, VM self-service. Let me give you just a little sneak peek. Soon, you'll be able to delegate access to other users within your Azure Active Directory so that they can create and manage their own virtual machines on top of your Azure Stack HCI cluster. This effectively gives them a consistent tool set in the Azure portal and the Azure CLI, or command line tools, so that they can create VMs on HCI just like they would do in the public cloud. And it also provides a lightly isolated concept of tenancy, because these users to whom you delegate these permissions don't actually have the ability to access the underlying infrastructure and mess up the fabric. I am so excited for this, and I know it's been among the most requested features from customers too. So that's what we mean when we say that Azure Stack HCI is delivered through Azure, and really that it has Azure built in. Let's switch gears now and talk about what makes Azure Stack HCI familiar for IT to manage and operate. First and foremost, you can use Azure Stack HCI without disrupting the established processes and relationships that you have for procuring server hardware. We know that this is critical. You can deploy Azure Stack HCI on your choice of over 200 server solutions from 20+ partners so that you can choose the partner that provides the best selection and support in your region and your geography. Now, just to give a sense for these numbers, I want to show you the diversity of solutions that are available in the catalog. This is just a selection of the ones that are there. You'll see they range from 1U to 2U to 4U. Some of them are tower form factor or rack form factor. Some of them have external direct attached storage and a JBOD. It's really an immense amount of variety. And more than that, you can customize most of these solutions so that they actually suit your needs. Over and above simply choosing from the 200, a solution is really a server system plus a prescribed host bus adapter plus a prescribed network adapter family. But you're free to configure the processor, the memory, the storage, and more subject to the vendor's compatibility matrix. So this means there's not really 200, there's more like almost infinitely many servers that you can choose to run Azure Stack HCI. Earlier, we talked about cloud-based management, but what happens if your Azure Stack HCI loses access to the cloud temporarily? It's no problem. In addition to the Azure portal, Azure Stack HCI includes a rich set of edge local management tools that are always available. In fact, in a pinch, Azure Stack HCI can run for up to 30 days completely disconnected from Azure, although we don't recommend that. Let me give you an example of how the edge local tools, which are Admin Center, work really in concert with the cloud-based tools, the Azure portal, to provide a complementary and comprehensive set of manageability tools. I'm going to give you a demo now in which we will do a scenario that actually spans both of these sets of tools. I'm going to start in Admin Center. This is the edge local tooling. And you can see here I'm looking at a list of all of the virtual machines running on my Azure Stack HCI. If I want, with just a few clicks, I can select one of them and choose to protect it by replicating that VM in real time with a very tight RPO up into the public cloud. This, behind the scenes, is taking advantage of Azure Site Recovery. Because I'm logged in, it knows who I am, and there's really not much I have to specify. Now, once it's protected, I can click that link, and you'll see suddenly I've switched from the local tooling into the Azure portal. And now I can see that that virtual machine, accounting 02, is replicated up into the cloud, and that replication is healthy, and this VM is protected. And just in that quick scenario, I seamlessly switched from one set of tools into the Azure portal, and you can see how they really work together in concert with a consistent look and feel to provide you with the manageability you need wherever and whenever you need it. Now, last but certainly not least, we know how important and valuable it is for IT to be able to standardize on tools and processes that they can apply across their entire estate, across all of the servers that they manage. That's why we believe that to modernize and use Azure Stack HCI, you shouldn't need to change the way you operate. You shouldn't need to throw out the skills that your team already has. Azure Stack HCI offers full compatible support with Windows PowerShell, meaning if you have existing scripts or automation, you can continue to use those. If you have an existing investment in System Center, coming soon, you'll be able to use System Center Operations Manager and System Center Virtual Machine Manager with Azure Stack HCI. And even third-party tools for things like monitoring and backup will work with Azure Stack HCI. For example, we're delighted to partner with Altaro, one of the most popular and fast-growing VM backup solutions, who have already thrown their support behind Azure Stack HCI. You can learn more about their award-winning products by visiting altaro.com. The key point to the customer is that you are the administrator, you're in control, and you get to choose which tools make sense for you. So this has been a quick tour of what Azure Stack HCI is and everything that's new in version 20H2. I hope you found this content valuable, and I thank you for taking the time to watch. If you're eager to get hands-on with Azure Stack HCI, then I have good news for you. It's available in preview today. You can sign up and get started at azure.com/HCI. Today's preview is just the beginning of an exciting new chapter for Azure Stack HCI and for edge and on-premises products from Azure. Over the coming months and years, Azure Stack HCI is going to keep getting better. That's how subscription services work. We hope you'll come along on this journey with us. On behalf of the engineering team here in Redmond, thank you, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and working with you to make Azure Stack HCI better for you. Thank you, and thanks for watching.